today is just look at the basics of putting up a tent that goes up inner first. Before you do that, what you've got to do is select a suitable location. The area needs to be firm and flat and preferably level, and you want to site your tent away from trees and obstructions. The reason you don't want to camp under trees is because when it rains, the water will be dripping off even when it stops raining, the water will be dripping off the tree and onto your tent. And also there's the chance that things could fall off the tree, like branches and things like that. And obviously animals are attracted to trees, so you don't want to be sited too close to the trees. Right, first thing, before you go out on an expedition, when you're issued your tents, you need to take them home and make sure that all the correct bits are in there, such as the poles, pegs, inner and outer, and it's all serviceable. So you take the tent out of the bag. In windy conditions you might need to put the bag in your pocket, but today's quite nice. And then just lay the tent out in the rough area that you're going to be selecting to pitch. Now this tent goes up inner first, so you want to put the outer off to one side. Open up the tent and find out where your door is. Now on these tents it's fairly straightforward, there's your door. Now when you're siting the tent, you want the door away from the wind, so you want the back end facing into the wind so that your tent doesn't fill up with air every time you're going in and out. These ones, it's fairly simple. You've got on the inner sleeves that the poles fit through. More about those in a minute. And a little tip here is probably peg out your inner first, just so that it doesn't blow away if it gets a bit windy. And when you put the pegs in, put them in at a 45-degree angle, like so that they're nice and tight to the ground. Most things should go hand tight, and then when you pull on that, it's not going to pull out. So I'm just going to quickly put these in. First part done. You can see we've got a bit of wind now and it's keeping that down. Tents will all have various different sized poles, etc. So you need to make sure you've got the poles that are right for your tent. For this tent there are 3 poles. And you just assemble the poles as so. Bear with me a second. So that you can ascertain the correct length. Now for this tent you should find you have 2 longer poles and 1 short pole. And it's the longer poles you need for putting up the inner. So you can see there, I've got 2 long poles and 1 short pole. So when you're doing this, make sure you're a couple of metres apart from your colleagues putting their tents up so you don't hit anybody with the poles and cause anybody any injuries. So the next thing I need to do is push the poles through the sleeves that I mentioned earlier. And you'll find a corresponding sleeve and they go over diagonally. Push it through so they're fairly equidistant, like so. I'll just repeat that process using the other pole. Try always to think about pushing the poles rather than pulling them, otherwise they will separate. Okay, now I've got those equidistant, you'll notice that there's, on each side of the tent here, there's some little spigots. You place the sleeve of the end of the pole in those spigots like so. And now working your way around the tent, you can then push the poles up two of you, this would be obviously much easier, but it is possible for one of you. And then place on a spigot. Then you can clip, if you have clips, clip the little side pieces on into the hooks, and they give you a little bit more rigidity. If you wish, you can do this chop up here. You don't need to tie it too tight, something like that will be adequate. This is generally the trickier bit, especially now we're getting a little bit of wind. We need to find the door area, which is there, and on this particular tent, the middle piece. Got some ties there, probably a good idea to tie these to the middle, just loosely, and that will help you get the outer lined up with the inner. You'll also notice on this particular tent there are Velcro fasteners, and these again help you line it up with the poles. They don't have to be rigidly tight, but just loosely attached to help you get your shape. So once I've got it in place, throw it over, and now you can see the shape of the outer going on to the inner tent and its frame. What I tend to do now is work logically from one end of the tent. So with your pegs, starting at the back, just loosely peg it. For the time being, you can adjust it again later in the same manner as we did for the inner. We can adjust the pegs later on. The shorter pole goes through this outer sleeve. Again, push the pole so it doesn't separate through the material of the sleeve. Try and get it equidistant, and then you've got your spigots there and another one this side. We can come back to our pegs. You have your door there, so you use that one there. Pull it nice and tight. Same with that one there. And then we can go round and just finish off the last peg. It's important you try and get the outer stretched away from the inner so that you don't get wet inside. Conditions like we've got today, it's not too windy, you wouldn't need to necessarily bother with the guy ropes. However, in windy conditions, use more pegs and peg out the guy ropes to give you more stability. And that's how to put up an inner first tent.